Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me in DC today. We have a small but passionate crowd here, I think, so thanks a lot. I'm Sarah Slayman, and I work on the global sustainability team with Amazon Web Services, and I'd like to talk today about the work some of my colleagues and my customers are doing to use technology to help combat the global climate crisis. I'm going to start with Amazon and AWS's commitment to sustainability, and then I'm going to dive in on how the AWS infrastructure teams are using the cloud to advance our sustainability goals. And I'm going to focus a lot on renewable energy in that discussion. And then I'll cover how we're helping customers enable their own sustainability business goals. And I'm going to end with some examples of customers who are building solutions that lower carbon emissions and reduce waste using AWS services. So let's set the context with some data. The science tells us that we have a limited window to make unprecedented headway in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Crossing this threshold risks the most devastating effects of the climate crisis. Preventing this requires almost halving total global carbon emissions by 2030, and it requires reaching net zero by 2050. With this in mind, in 2019, Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge along with Global Optimism. The Climate Pledge is Amazon's commitment to reach net zero carbon by 2040, and that is 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement deadline of 2050. As part of the Climate Pledge, we're also on a path to power our entire operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025. And I'll talk to you about how that path has accelerated. That date was originally 2030. Now, both of these goals apply to all of Amazon. So that's all deliveries, that's fulfillment centers, that's all of our businesses and stores, and it's all the AWS data centers powering the workloads you're using. But even with all of Amazon involved, we know that we cannot do this alone. The Climate Pledge is based on the idea that large companies are accountable and can act on these commitments. And a good example of that is the Climate Pledge Fund. That's a $2 billion investment fund that Amazon has put towards companies that are working on very hard to decarbonize areas. I can give you a few examples. One would be transportation. So Rivian is one of the recipients of the Climate Pledge Fund. We've actually ordered 100,000 electric delivery vehicles from Rivian. That's the largest ever electric delivery vehicle order. Another one is CarbonCure, and CarbonCure is taking on the production of concrete, which is historically very carbon intensive to produce, and they're actually looking at how to sequester carbon dioxide inside of concrete. The Climate Pledge is open to all companies who want to challenge themselves and commit to reaching net zero carbon by 2040. And if you're interested, there are 3 principles to the Climate Pledge. The first is reporting. So we acknowledge that transparency, measuring, and mapping are crucial to understanding carbon emissions. Second is carbon elimination. And this starts with evaluating your business and reducing the amount of energy needed to run it. That's always the first step. And then second, it involves procuring renewable energy. And then third, looking at the supply chain and the other elements involved. And then the third principle, because we know that we operate in a physical realm where companies have complex supply chains with materials that are hard to decarbonize, we rely on verifiable, real, and credible offsets to offset any remaining emissions to reach that net zero carbon by 2040 goal. To date, we have over 300 signatories who've joined the Climate Pledge. They come from 51 industries and 29 countries, and you can see just a sample of them here. So how is Amazon driving our path to net zero carbon? Well, we've started laying groundwork and moving quite quickly, and we've looked at the biggest needle movers. And one of our biggest levers is renewable energy. So I want to look at the path of acceleration involved with renewable energy for Amazon. And these numbers are big enough that I'm going to talk about them in terms of gigawatts. A gigawatt is a billion watts, but maybe to make that a little bit easier to understand, a typical light bulb you'd have in your home, that's usually 60 to 100 watts. So a gigawatt, we're talking 10 million light bulbs, so just to set some context. Before the climate pledge, Amazon had just over 1 gigawatt of total renewable energy capacity. By 2020, we had more than 6 times that and totaled 6.5 gigawatts. And in December of 2020, Amazon became the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. In 2021, we nearly doubled this amount. We set the record for the most renewable energy purchased by a corporation in 1 year, and we broke our own record in 2020 in purchasing more renewable energy. And to date, in 2022, so far we've added 3.5 gigawatts of additional renewable energy capacity. Amazon remains the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. We're also the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the US and in the EU. In total, Amazon has 310 global renewable energy projects. 134 of these are utility-scale solar and wind projects. And another 176 are rooftop solar facilities on fulfillment centers and stores worldwide. Altogether, this is the same electricity output equivalent of powering 3.9 million US homes for a year. If you're still trying to think of what millions of light bulbs looks like, I'll give you a different visual that might be a little bit easier. For every additional megawatt hour of renewable energy that we add, we are displacing fossil fuel generation. And our renewable energy projects displace in total 17.3 million metric tons of carbon emissions. Now that is the same as the amount of carbon that can be sequestered in a forest the size of Iceland. So how do you manage the world's largest corporate energy portfolio? Well, we know, like a lot of sustainability challenges, this starts with data. We need to set baselines, understand what we're producing, and then from there we can work to optimize them. So we had a couple options. First, we could keep things high level and just look at outputs per site. But that didn't give us the insights that we wanted to really optimize renewable energy production. So then we could do what utility companies have traditionally done and just hire a lot of people to be looking at this data continually, but that didn't give us the scalability that we were looking for. So we turned to the AWS cloud, and we used AWS services like IoT Sitewise and like Amazon SageMaker, which is our machine learning platform that makes it easy to train, build, and deploy machine models. And we built an intelligent platform to understand the performance of our wind turbines and solar panels throughout our renewable energy projects. Through this system, we're collecting hundreds of data points every second, and we have a team dedicated to looking at this data, the Renewable Energy Optimization Team, and I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about their work here.
Amazon is on a path to power our operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025. I'm Charlie Deitch, and I lead the AWS Energy team. In order to deliver our renewable goal, we're developing solar projects and wind projects, including this wind farm here in California.
And we're developing software built on AWS to optimize our renewable portfolio at scale. So here we're looking at live metrics from Turbine 5. And we have a total of over 200 metrics from each turbine at this facility. My name is Athanasios Karamanolis, and I lead the Renewable Energy Optimization team at AWS. With AWS IoT and machine learning services, we stream and analyze millions of data points in real time from projects across the world.
At AWS, we're looking at how to decarbonize our entire business. This year, Amazon announced its first 2 solar plus storage projects. This software will let us optimize how we deliver clean electricity onto the grid. Decarbonizing our energy system is an enormous challenge. We're using the AWS cloud to build automated mechanisms at scale, ensuring our renewable fleet delivers as much clean electricity as possible.
So let's do a little exercise. Let's pretend you are on Charlie's team, who you just met here, and you are looking at this heat map. And this map is showing 13 wind turbines over a period of 48 hours. The red is showing periods of high output, so quite windy and a lot of energy generation. And then as you move towards the yellow, that's periods of low output. So what do you notice about these patterns? Anything stand out? I'll jump in and notice the large blue lines, right? So those are actually outages. There was some sort of reason why the turbine was not running. And that could be planned maintenance, could be unplanned maintenance, or some other reason. But what's problematic here is we see we're having outages during some periods of high wind, right? During our periods of highest output. And we want to avoid that. We've built this, expensive wind farm. We want the turbines running when it's most windy. So what we can do is send automated alerts to the plant operator to alert them that, hey, the maintenance needs to happen during the periods of low wind power. Something else you might observe would be that some of these turbines are producing a lot more output than others. So why could that be? It could be because of localized differences, but it could also be things like the orientation of the blades, or even things like the oil temperatures in the gearbox. And just like we saw from the team, we're actually collecting all that data. We're collecting it with the same granularity as the data we have here. So what we can do is correlate them and look for patterns and start to understand why some turbines may have greater output than others and learn from that. So we can do this with 13 turbines. We can see that here, and a site operator could do that. But when we're expanding this to hundreds of turbines, that's when we need to start training machines to do that for us. And that's where you saw machine learning comes in to really generate efficiencies here. Now, from the work that this team has done, we estimate that it is equivalent to adding an entire new renewable energy project to our portfolio. In fact, equivalent to adding a 200 megawatt wind farm, except without all of the expense of putting that in place. So really important work here on optimization. And then one thing that's a testament to our renewable energy optimization team, who you just saw, is that they've also shared their learnings with customers across the world about managing large fleets of renewable energy. Here we have Greenco, who is a leading energy solution provider in India. Greenco is enabling 6.3 million households in India with renewable energy generated electricity. And our renewable energy optimization team collaborated directly with them to share learnings. Greenco also turned to their AWS account team, and they worked with a local partner from the AWS Partner Network. And what they did was build an IoT-enabled data lake, and then a real-time dashboard to understand the efficiencies in their own renewable energy portfolio. And they built this all in a serverless fashion so that it was easy to manage. And the latency in their operational dashboard is only 1 minute. Another area where our renewable energy team is having impact beyond Amazon is in their relentless innovation in developing projects in new countries. These are not necessarily technical innovations. These are things like new commercial structures and new regulatory mechanisms, which can be very hard to put in place in some areas. A good example would be in South Africa, where we have executed the first corporate renewable power purchase agreement, or PPA. You're seeing that pictured here. It's a solar farm. To do this, we worked with the local utility company, Eskom. We worked with the Ministry of Energy and the City of Cape Town to be able to execute this, because nothing like this had been done before. We did the same in Japan, where we executed the first corporate solar power purchase agreement. And then we're working in challenging markets like Singapore and China. We're also taking on areas where there's limited land mass. That was the case in both Singapore and Japan. And we're figuring out how to put solar projects in areas where there's just not a lot of land to put them. Amazon is also investing in offshore wind projects. This includes our largest renewable energy project to date, which is a 380 megawatt offshore wind project off the coast of the Netherlands. Now, offshore wind allows, generally there's faster wind speeds, and even a little bit of an increase in wind speed can really produce more renewable energy. But we can also use bigger turbines when doing offshore wind projects. And of course, you're not using up the land area that could be used for other things or could just be preserved. Experts estimate that offshore wind is currently only providing a tiny fraction of the world's energy needs, but it has the potential to provide over 18 times the total world energy needs. So a lot of potential there. And while new renewable energy is essential, and we will continue to build that, we recognize that the power grid needs clean energy around the clock. So not just when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And we're working on cost-effective solutions to solve this, both for ourselves and for others. We've announced multiple solar energy plus storage projects. We just announced 2 additional projects this year. And these utility-scale storage projects provide the battery infrastructure needed to be able to run carbon-free energy during those hours where the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. Our solar plus energy storage projects total 445 megawatts to date. So while we continue to progress on renewable energy, Amazon always focuses first on improving efficiency and reducing the energy that we use, particularly in delivering AWS services to our customers. I can quote Peter DeSantis, Senior Vice President of AWS here, and say, "The greenest energy is the energy that you don't use." We're working up and down the stack to achieve this, and I'll talk about these in slightly more detail, but essentially you can see that we're considering things from the materials in our data centers to the chips in our processors to enabling customers with data for sustainability innovation. Operational efficiency is part of our DNA, and we ensure our data centers operate as efficiently as possible. So this involves looking at the total energy going into a data center and then comparing that to what we know our servers need in order to run. And the delta between that represents overhead, and that could be things like cooling the data center or just electricity losses. Our teams take goals on reducing that amount of overhead, and we are continually trying to drive that down. I can give you one example where we replaced a large central UPS system, that's an uninterruptible power supply system, with several in-rack kind of micro units. Now, this replacement and other optimizations reduced energy conversions, so AC to DC conversions were reduced to the point that the energy conversion loss was reduced by about 35%. In addition to renewable energy to reach net zero, we know we need to address a broad category of indirect emissions, and that is the materials used to construct our data centers. This is known as embodied carbon. Now, the biggest source of embodied carbon for AWS is concrete. I mentioned CarbonCure, who's making lower carbon concrete. We're working with them and other companies, and we've set a goal that we need to have design standards that require a 20% reduction in the embodied carbon of concrete for new US data centers, and we'll be expanding this requirement globally. The second biggest source of our embodied carbon is steel. And similar to concrete, there are different methods that can be used to produce steel, and some of them lower the embodied carbon by up to 5%. So particularly with a method called EAF, or electric arc furnace produced steel, We've used that steel in 6 of our data centers so far, and we plan to expand usage of that into more data centers in the US and Europe. Now, both of these send signals to the market that we are looking for materials with lower embodied carbon. AWS's infrastructure is built on our own purpose-built hardware, and it's optimized for workloads run by AWS customers. A good example of that is Graviton3. Graviton3 is our 3rd generation ARM-based processor, and Graviton3 instances use up to 60% less energy for the same performance versus other comparable EC2 instances. We understand that there is an increasing need for compute and AI/ML workloads, and we understand that these can often power sustainability outcomes and human health and other important outcomes. So we are continuing to improve the efficiency of Graviton and Inferentia, our machine learning processor. And I want to touch a little bit on what we're doing around water stewardship. So AWS approaches the cooling of each data center holistically, and we look at the location, and we look first to direct evaporative cooling. So if we can cool a data center using cold outside air, we're going to do that instead of using water. In fact, our data centers in Ireland and Sweden use direct evaporative cooling to such a point that we only need water for 5% of the year. Rest of the year, they don't need to use any water. Now, when we do need to use water, we prioritize using non-potable or non-drinkable water. And we have other systems in place to be able to recycle the water and to do on-site treatment before that water is discharged. I can give you an example from Loudoun County, which is maybe an hour from here, but depending on traffic, very much depending, where we work directly with Loudoun County Water to be the first data center to use reclaimed water to cool our data center. So we put the systems in place to be able to source that and put that in place. We're also using IoT to measure water flow within data centers. And we have historic data that gives us predictions for how much water we should be using. And if we go beyond this, we have automated alerts to be able to let us know that something is up and that needs to be looked into. We review water metrics weekly and have teams that are managing water consumption, again, using IoT. So let's look at what customers are doing and how AWS can enable your organization's sustainability goals. I think looking around this room, it's pretty safe to say we've been embracing digital transformation for the past probably 10 years or so. So we're doing things like making data-driven decisions, we're embracing the agility of the cloud and the ability to fail fast, and we're removing that undifferentiated heavy lifting so that we can focus on real business problems. Well, the same mindset can be put to sustainability, and we've found that companies who do that are outperforming their peers. Now, Accenture found the same thing, and they call these companies twin transformers. And they estimate they're outperforming their peers by 2.5 times. So my role is to work directly with customers to help them embrace sustainability transformation. And I can talk about this in 3 different ways. The first being just migrating to AWS. So all of those efficiencies that I talked about for the first half of this presentation, you can immediately get the benefit of when you migrate to AWS. But we don't stop there. We also want to help you optimize on the AWS cloud. So much like security, we see sustainability as a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer. We will drive our data centers to be as sustainable as possible, but we also need customers to make sure that they aren't using resources that they don't need and to make sure that they're using correctly sized resources. And then finally, we can use data to transform innovations and to look at what your business is doing for sustainability and create solutions that drive your sustainability goals. Looking a little bit closer at migrating, the company 451 Research has done studies where they surveyed several hundred enterprise data centers and looked at their infrastructure. And they looked at things like utilization rates and the facilities themselves. And what they found was running in AWS is 3.6 times more energy efficient than the median US enterprise data center, and that the customer can see an 88% reduction in carbon emissions just by migrating to AWS. 451 Research actually performed the same study, first in the US and then in Europe and in the Asia Pacific regions, and came up with similar numbers to this in each region. Now, why is that? Because that's pretty significant, 88% just by migrating. Well, the majority of it is due to higher server utilization in AWS. Our scale allows us to run at very high utilization, and that is the most sustainable way to run a server. Another percentage of it is due to the facilities themselves, so a lot of that work that I was just describing and how we optimize our facilities. And then 17% of it is due to the renewable energy that we are adding to the grids in which we operate. We are also enabling our customers to make sustainable choices once they're in the AWS cloud. And we've done this in the form of a new pillar for the AWS well-architected framework. Now, the well-architected framework has been used for years by AWS solutions architects and our customers in order to give best practices to builders for looking at an AWS architecture and making it secure and reliable and cost optimized and adhering to the pillars we've called out here. Last year, we added sustainability as a core pillar to that well-architected framework, which really calls out how much we value it and how much our builders were looking for this, because this was based on customer demand. If we want to look at some of the examples of what you can do within an AWS architecture to use less energy and therefore produce less carbon emissions, we can see a few of them here. The first one's probably not surprising, as I've described Graviton3 and the energy gains you get from using it. But really it's about using the right-sized instance for your job, using the appropriate type of instance for what you need to do, using the latest processors, and when possible, using Graviton-based instances. You can also choose to offload that demand of needing to run at a high utilization. You can just offload that to AWS, where again, our scale can help us do that more efficiently. You can do that by choosing serverless services. We also want to make sure that you're not running workloads you're not using or storing data you don't need. And I can give you an example of that. So just like our teams in the renewable energy and data center teams take goals on making what they do more efficient, our service teams do the same thing. So one of our service teams was storing a large amount of logs in S3 and wanted to do an optimization exercise with sustainability in mind. So they chose to switch their compression algorithm to Z-standard. Anything that was switched from gzip to Z-standard, they saw about a 30% improvement. And then switching from LZ4 to Z-standard, they also got improvements in the compression ratio, up to 1 to 15. Now, the cool part is altogether, they were able to reduce the total amount of logs they were storing by an exabyte. So really nice example of how little things can add up to quite a big amount. And we were very excited in March of this year to introduce the Customer Carbon Footprint tool so that customers can start to understand and track these kinds of optimizations. The Customer Carbon Footprint tool allows customers to understand the carbon emissions associated with their usage of AWS at an account level. We break this down monthly, and we give historic data. It goes back to January of 2020. So that customers can look at trends in their data and see how carbon emissions have changed over time. We also provide a forecast graph, which shows how we predict the customer's carbon emissions to change as Amazon continues on its path to reach 100% renewable energy by 2025. Now, this tool was built based on customer demand, and we're not done yet, because again, based on customer feedback, we are looking at adding greater granularity to this tool, and we're looking at eventually adding more sustainability metrics beyond just carbon emissions. So thinking about that transformation pillar, we know that the climate crisis is a complicated and multi-layered problem, and data can be key to understanding that, because simply put, you can't manage what you can't measure. Now, big data in particular, which is needed to do things like overall climate risk analysis and earth mapping, that can be hard, right? It's oftentimes dispersed, it's in many different formats. There's different tools needed to use it. So Amazon has services available to help address some of these problems, one being the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, or ASDI, which provides no-cost access to large amounts of data sets from organizations like NOAA, NASA, and other universities and other organizations. And this data covers things like weather forecast, satellite imagery, air quality, and other data needed to make sustainability insights. Now, we also offer the sustainability portion of the AWS Data Exchange, and that is both open and licensed data, and that covers other elements like ESG risk scoring and climate risk mapping data. Through ASDI, we also provide cloud grants with the idea of democratizing access to both the data and the compute and other resources needed to understand it and to make insights. We're proud of the actions that our customers are taking using ASDI and our scalable infrastructure to tackle hard climate problems. And I'm going to let you hear from some of them here.
Science tells us that the planet is warming too quickly, and the climate is changing faster than ever before. Researchers and scientists are focused on identifying solutions to help communities at risk. But one of their biggest roadblocks is getting access to climate data. Too much important data, like weather forecasts, climate projections, and satellite images, is stored in large files which most people can't access without the help of expensive and powerful computers. But Amazon is working on a solution to this data and computing problem. The Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, known as ASDI, is a program that collaborates with scientific organizations around the world, like NASA, to identify important data, and then host the data on the AWS cloud to make it available for anyone to access at no charge. ASDI is already helping experts and government leaders make notable progress on climate solutions. One example lies in Tanzania. There, ASDI and nonprofit Digital Earth Africa are making satellite data available to local Tanzanian leaders.
The big data that is availed through the various platforms like Digital Earth Africa running on the AWS, these are the game changers. The information on the Digital Earth Africa platform helps the State University of Zanzibar lecturers and youth members to actually be able to get more information about the trends which is available from the analysis-ready data. At Digital Earth Africa, we are dealing with petabytes of information. It has to be on a web service where we can actually update it as much as possible. We are looking also going beyond 5 petabytes for the continent.
Through the DE Africa platform, satellite data can be used to monitor deforestation and changes in coastal mangrove forests. Mangroves are important because they sequester 3 to 4 times more carbon from the atmosphere than tropical forests. The local communities also rely on the mangroves to stabilize the shorelines, protect the land and people from natural disasters, and provide habitats for marine life. Local leaders previously didn't have any way to access this satellite data, and it's proven to be a critical resource for mangrove management.
So now they are realizing that, oh, we are not supposed to cut this tree, and instead we have to plant this tree as much as possible.
As a result, local groups have increased their knowledge of the mangrove forests and are working to replant mangroves with the goal of planting 1,000 per week.
I have already gained the knowledge about climate change, and I will use that knowledge to instruct others that to perform the activities to reduce the climate change. And as you know, everywhere now the climate change is the issues. So I hope that this will be reduced, but the technology is required for it.
So customers are coming to us with questions and with problems like what we've seen here. And I talk to customers every day about their sustainability challenges, and this is the kind of questions that I get. One good approach here can be to look at the overall company sustainability goals. Many companies now have these. And to think about how to break those down into smaller, short-term projects that can be the building blocks to meet that larger goal. So AWS can help with that with both our services, as we've seen some examples, but also with our expertise. I can give you an example of our AWS professional services team. So we have a team dedicated to sustainability projects. They are experts in various sustainability fields, and they're working with customers, including Amazon as a customer, to innovate in some of the areas that you see here. They're doing things like building a full framework for tracking a business's Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 carbon footprint, and that's to use the Greenhouse Gas Protocol terminology, where the business can understand its full carbon footprint and then can report on that according to common industry standards. They're doing things like looking at sustainable building management, and they're also taking lessons learned from Amazon and the retail side on things like sustainable packaging and actually using machine learning to determine the optimal size package for different items to fit the most of them in a delivery truck. This goes beyond professional services. We also have a network of AWS partners who have sustainability capabilities. And we're building a group of solutions architects focused on sustainability who are providing guidance and reference architectures to help customers build these kinds of solutions themselves. Let's end by looking at a few more customer examples. I'm going to start with Bayer, who are a global health sciences company, but they also do a lot of work in the ag tech sector. And Bayer approached AWS, and they actually approached the professional services team that I've just described with a problem, which was they wanted to track the full carbon emissions that goes into an agricultural product. And in this case, it was corn, and it was corn that was being purchased for ethanol production. So ethanol is often used as a replacement for fossil fuels, so it makes sense that we would want to really closely understand the carbon emissions that have gone into the production of ethanol. So in order to do this, AWS and Bayer worked together to create a digital tracking solution that went from farmer all the way through transport and through processing to the end purchaser who was purchasing the ethanol. Now, there were a lot of elements here, but things like linking the particular corn with the farmer who produced it. Many different farming techniques can have a big impact on carbon emissions. You can do things like no-till or cover crops that help reduce the amount of emissions that go into farming. And then, of course, same for transport. We measured how far these crops were being transported. Now, the effect of this was that these purchasers now knew the total carbon footprint and could make different decisions in terms of who they're purchasing from. Commercial buildings are responsible for 40% of emissions in the US, and the company Carbon Lighthouse is taking that on by making it easy and profitable for commercial building managers to reduce the amount of energy needed to run a commercial building. So commercial buildings generally run their HVAC and lighting based on set points, but what Carbon Lighthouse is doing is adding IoT sensors and looking at things like occupancy sensors and even building layout and things like external weather conditions. They're then able to create dynamic models using AWS AI and ML that can more accurately predict the HVAC and lighting needs of the buildings and reduce the energy used in those buildings. Carbon Lighthouse estimates it has reduced 260,000 metric tons of emissions to date. And if I've timed things correctly, it's almost 5 o'clock, so I wanted to end with some sustainable beer drinking here. Weisberger, who is a part of Anheuser-Busch InBev, had a problem. They noticed a problem, and this was wasted beer, which is never a good thing, right? But even thinking back to corn, we now know there's embodied carbon that goes into making everything, and that includes beer, so we don't want to be wasting any of it. So what Weisberger did was install flow sensors and use AWS IoT Greengrass, which can run on the edge, runs computing on the edge while the analytics stay in the cloud, to determine things like beer volume per beer and also temperature. And they even included anonymized data from other local bars to look at local trends of what was selling better than others. Now, once they had this data, they were able to much more accurately forecast and predict what would sell and really significantly reduce the amount of wasted beer. So one bar has estimated that they reduced waste by 45%. For them, that equated to $3,000 in a month. I want to end here, but I will let you know if you want to dive in on any of the technologies that I've been describing. You can use our AWS Skill Builder platform, and you can also check out our AWS certifications. But with that, I want to thank you for joining me talking about sustainability and for joining us in DC today. Thank you.